accuracy trade-off. So anyways, this is a very, very basic slide. You've probably had this in like Bio 100 or Anatomy and Physiology or Kinetic Anatomy, and this is not going to show up on the test, on the Unit 2 test. So it's more just to kind of get us going. I said, I'll repeat, it will not show up on the Unit 2 test. Kind of just looking at the nervous system, just a very basic overview. We're going to look at like a bunch of other slides that are similar in the fact that they're just kind of overall diagrams of how we look at neural control from a 10,000 foot view, a macro level. Okay, so we have central nervous system, CNS. Whenever you see CNS, we're just referring to central nervous system. Then we have peripheral nervous system. Okay, and we can kind of look at it this way as well. So we have our sensory or our afferent division and our motor or our efferent division. I want us to start getting familiar with these terms if you're not already. So sensory and afferent, AFF, and motor and efferent. Okay, so we'll talk about in a minute how signals go from our receptors, our vision, our hearing, our receptors in the skin, and they travel kind of up the pathway, so to speak, to our brain and our spinal cord, and then we come up with like what we want our correct response to be, and then that correct response, that motor program, gets sent down these what are termed descending pathways to the effectors. Essentially, in our case with movement, talking about our motor neurons. But we'll get a little bit more in depth. Again, this slide will also not be on the test, just kind of another diagram for looking at things. So here we get a little bit closer to maybe what might be on the test, because there's some overlap with Unit 1. So does anyone remember what the information processing model is? We talked about this in Unit 1. We just had this on the Unit 1 test on Monday. Mike, what do we got?
Alex, stimulus.
Right.
Stimulus identification.
You're on it.
Yeah.
Somebody else help him out? Stimulus identification. Ethan? Response selection.
And motor program.
Nice job. You've seen these slides doubled up in biomechanics, but yeah, absolutely. Stimulus identification, response selection, execute the motor program. So from a neural basis, it looks like this. You have these afferent neurons, right? So you have your sensory receptors. That could be the cutaneous receptors in your skin. That could be your vision. That could be your hearing. Okay? You have these sensory receptors. They travel in a different diagram. This will be up through afferent pathways, okay, through the peripheral nervous system, afferent. Then they get to the inner neurons in the brain and spinal cord. This is your response selection. So this is stimulus identification. This is response selection, and this is execute the motor program. So from a neural standpoint, this is the anatomy or the biology underlying that information processing model. Now, if we're in like ex-phys class, when you guys get to EXS 380 next semester or the semester that follows, we can ultimately see that like the effectors are like vasoconstriction of your like capillaries, or maybe we see that it's an increase in adrenaline release. But for our purposes, we'll mostly be talking like muscles, like the effectors are your skeletal muscle. Okay? You guys have this in your D2L slides, or you do not? I'll make that correction for next time. Do they have this? In your D2L slides, delete this and see if that's hiding underneath. It is, yeah. So just create a duplicate slide. Double it up, or just take a picture. About that. Okay, so similar information, but just presented a slightly different way. So a lot of times this is termed like ascending pathways and descending pathways. It's really just a matter of conceptualizing it. So if we have our receptors, like our skin, I touch something, I feel something, I see something, I hear something, there's a stimulus identification. Sensory, afferent, ascending. These are all kind of concepts that overlap. It travels, quote unquote, up. Okay? And you can think about it in a sense like, okay, if I touch a hot stove, right, that sensation is going to literally travel up. right? So ascending pathways to the brain and spinal cord, or up, kind of. Okay, and we have this response selection, okay, this processing, and then the action potential, the motor program, whether it's reflexive or whether it's voluntary, okay, goes back down to the effectors, i.e. the skeletal muscle. We're going to talk about, on slides that follow later on in the slide deck, kind of different types of motor programs. So they can be reflexive or they can be conscious, voluntary. Now the two students who are simultaneously taking biomechanics don't chime in here. But what's the difference between a reflex and a voluntary action? What do we think? Like, we haven't covered this yet in this class, but it's kind of common sense. Grace. Reflex you cannot control, not under conscious control. Good. There's some other differences though. I saw Kara's hand first. Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say the same thing, and a voluntary movement
Is obviously under conscious control. Good, Mike.
Usually, like, reflexive action potentials kind of stop at the spinal cord.
Right, just to the spinal cord, absolutely, not up to the brain. Why?
Because it's like a quicker.
Faster, just speed, right? If you think about reflexes, and we'll get into this in the last slides of the slide deck, they're mostly safety mechanisms. Hand off a hot stove, center of mass gets out in front of your feet, you stumble reflex, so to keep you from falling flat on your face, right? A lot of these are safety mechanisms. If it goes all the way up to the brain and all the way back down, it's too slow. Your hand's cooked bacon on a stove, right? So you gotta have those actions take place without thinking and very fast. Crazy.
Are you also born with reflexes?
You are,
Reflexes,
yeah.
or do you have to, like, learn a bunch of movements?
Great answer. So skills and most learned actions are, most learned actions are learned, yeah. And most of the skills we talk about are learned through practice or experience. You don't have to teach a baby how to get their hand off a hot stove, right? And likewise, the stumble reflex and some of the other ones we'll talk about are not taught skills. They are inborn. Very good answers, guys. You brought your A game, even on a Wednesday. So let's look at the neuron. We've got a couple of different diagrams that we'll show here, and you guys do have all of this in your D2L slides, right? You have, okay, good. And again, I know you've had this in like a Bio 110 or an anatomy and physiology class. You probably had this in a high school bio class. The point is that we're reinforcing this, is that you're getting this a few different times, right? You'll get the same information in biomechanics. You might get it in ex-phys. You need to see it a few different times, 3, 4, 5 different classes so that you can internalize it. Okay, we're gonna have these dendrites, and we'll go more into depth on this in the next slide. They receive information, kind of have the cell body with the nucleus of the neuron. Okay, and we have this axon that transmits information away from the cell body, and it either brings it to the next neuron in the chain, or it brings it to like a skeletal muscle at the neuromuscular junction. And we'll kind of be concerned with both, from transmitting action potential to neuron and action potential to skeletal muscle, because that's ultimately how you stimulate a muscle fiber to contract. But on the next slides, I'll just kind of go into a little bit more of the actual different structures here. But this just kind of gives you a nice look at, okay, one neuron connecting to another neuron, or one neuron connecting to a skeletal muscle. So the neuron is called the functional unit of the nervous system. And again, the two students who have me for biomechanics right now have already heard this piece. But so the functional unit refers to the smallest unit within an entire system that represents the greater characteristics of the system overall. So the neuron basically can receive information, it can transmit information, and we'll see that it has certain aspects that are afferent and certain aspects that are efferent. We've already talked about that in the overall nervous system, like, okay, the sensory neurons are afferent and the motor neurons are efferent, but actually each individual neuron has those same traits. So again, we have this cell body here, the dendrites up here. So they receive the action potentials, or they receive the information from the preceding neuron. If there was another neuron up here, i.e. like this, right, these dendrites are receiving the information from the neuron that precedes it. okay? And then the axon is carrying away the action potential from the cell body towards the next neuron, okay? And really, really important structure for us is this myelination, this white matter in these Schwann cells. So this myelination is like this electrical wrapping, you could think, or the wrapping that goes around an electrical wire. I'm no electrician, as you can tell, and electrical coating, I should say. And it speeds up the conduction velocity. So the more myelination you have, the faster the signal travels, and we'll have a few slides that kind of drive this point home. So the myelination, the white matter, the white fatty matter that wraps around the axon is super important for motor performance. Okay, not just motor performance, but also kind of some disease states. So, let's watch this video. Let's get this plays. Huh. That's not very good. Well, I'll get that video working for next time. But essentially, and we have an animated GIF that, oh no, that doesn't work either. Wait, I'll have to fix up these 2 slides for next class. Here's what happens, I'll just describe it. The action potential jumps from node over NVA to node over NVA. I'll go back to the diagram in a second. It essentially jumps from node over NVA to node over NVA in a neuron that has proper myelination. So where there are the Schwann cells that wrap around the axon, the action potential jumps from node over NVA to node over NVA, and the speed of conduction is very fast, and that's a good thing. You want fast conduction velocity. If my little animated GIF were actually animating at the moment, if you have a neuron that is demyelinated, that has no myelin due to a disease state such as multiple sclerosis, right, that signal is going to travel very, very slowly and potentially not even travel the length of the axon at all. Let me just go back a slide, since unfortunately these animations aren't working. So in saltatory, it's called either saltatory propagation or saltatory conduction, synonymous terms. That action potential jumps from node over NVA to node over NVA to node over NVA, and is very fast. It's very fast. Okay, so the myelination helps the speed of conduction. Okay, but in a situation like multiple sclerosis, the immune system attacks. It's an autoimmune disease. Attacks the myelination. It thinks it's an outside invader, like a bacteria or something else that's harmful, and so it causes demyelination, and ultimately the myelin around that's wrapped around the axon breaks down. And I mentioned this to my biomechanics class on Monday, where we're studying something somewhat similar to this at the moment. Unfortunately, this kind of hit my family personally. I had an aunt who, my dad's sister, we had a very aggressive case of MS when she was in her 30s, passed away very, very soon, and like before I really knew her, and actually like impacted my dad's whole life. He was he's an MD, and he was like going to be like a plastic surgeon or something, and he totally veered courses with his career, and now does research on MS. He's a faculty member at University of Connecticut because it kind of motivated him to do like MS research since his sister died of it. So kind of, again, a little bit sad from my family, but just kind of interesting as well. Once that myelin becomes demyelinated due to the autoimmune disease like MS, it cannot remyelinate. It cannot remyelinate. But in a healthy neuron, it can get enhanced myelination with more practice, which we'll talk about, which is really, really cool, kind of like a brighter note. Okay? So this is not on the test, but just as a side note about MS, so common symptoms, there's a lot of different types. I believe there's 4 different major types of MS. Okay, but you can get numbness or weakness, you can get kind of the squeezing sensation around the torso, unsteady gait, tremor, lack of coordination. I wish this GIF was playing. So in a healthy myelinated neuron, the action potential travels quickly down the length of the axon to the next neuron, on and on and on, from neuron to neuron to neuron. But in an unmyelinated neuron, the impulse either travels very slowly or doesn't finish the trip at all, so to speak. So obviously that would lead to a lack of motor coordination, right? And then, you can get into in later cases of MS, more progressive cases of MS, like vision problems and speech, that sort of thing. Okay, so let's talk about the neuron itself. Not too much red font in the slide deck, but a little bit. So again, we have, yes?
If a question about MS would be on like an exam, would it be about like the symptoms or the mechanisms?
Oh, only mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, only mechanism. Yeah, that's a good question, Grace. So this slide, like this would not be on the test, but like understanding this is fair game, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So you don't probably need to know the specifics of this for the test, but you should know you have afferent, efferent, and then interneurons. I think we've already covered that. With this you've already seen before. This is a little bit of a diagram, just kind of showing some of the differences between the three. On the next slide, we're going to talk just very briefly about the differences between alpha, gamma, and beta motor neurons. That won't be on the test, but just kind of the speed of conduction, the cross-sectional area, and what they innervate differentiates alpha, gamma, and beta. Okay, and then so sensory neurons, again, afferent, motor neurons, efferent, and interneurons. Look at that as your response selection.
What causes MS?
Yeah, great question. My dad spent his career trying to work on that exact problem. It's not fully known. I think there's a lot of theories and some, I don't know the specifics. It's not entirely known, though, I can tell you that much. There's a lot of theories as to what the triggers are of it's an autoimmune response. So just going back to the mechanism, hold on one second. Yeah. It's an autoimmune response where the immune system ends up attacking the myelin, as we've already said. But I think there's several theories as to what causes that response. Kira, what do you got for us?
Isn't it just genetic?
Not necessarily. It's a combination of genetic plus environmental, but no one's exactly sure what that environmental trigger is. Yeah, it's great question. Yeah. Yeah, very good questions. Not on the test, but good questions each. Kira, to your point, there's a genetic component. So like my dad, myself, my sister, we've always, whenever we get maybe symptoms that are mildly suggestive of MS, we get concerned.
Yeah.
Like I had tingling in my feet 6 months ago. I never was a little bit hyper aware of that sort of thing, but it's not strictly genetic. So.
My dad has it, so it always just appears.
Yeah, it comes up, yeah. There's certainly a genetic component. Think like most things, genetic and environmental component. Okay, cool info here, not on the test. Just kind of fun. So I work with sprinters. Usain Bolt covers 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. That's the fastest any humans ever run. An alpha motor neuron covers 100 meters in 1 second. That's how fast. Think about that. That's 220 miles an hour. So obviously that's within the context of your body. But that's how fast an alpha motor neuron sends that signal down the axon. That's pretty damn fast. Okay? If you look at this chart, this is from a classic textbook, the Roger Anoka motor control textbook. Not that you need to know it. But it looks at the different types of motor neurons. So this is alpha, beta, and gamma, what they innervate, and then the diameter, and then conduction velocity, how fast the signal travels. Let's just think for a second. What correspondence do you see between this and this? What do you see? Someone I haven't heard from today. What's the relationship between diameter and the velocity? Sorry, give me your name again.
Carter.
Carter.
Larger Schwann cells would equal faster conduction.
Larger cross-sectional area equals faster conduction velocity. Great. Okay? So, and again, for the 2 students in my biomechanics, you guys have heard this ad nauseum, but there's a relationship between cross-sectional area of a biomaterial and function. and I think I've talked about it in this class at least once. You lift weights, you hypertrophy, you can generate more force. You do plyometrics, your tendons increase your cross-sectional area, you can transmit or handle more force. You lift weights, your bones increase in cross-sectional area. They can handle more force, right? You practice, we'll talk about this momentarily, you get an increase in cross-sectional area, but just the way it naturally plays out, the distribution between the different types, some have a greater cross-sectional area than others. The ones that have a greater diameter, greater cross-sectional area, have greater conduction velocity, okay? So it's kind of a good overarching theme to keep in mind when it comes to what's termed biomaterials, the stuff that you're made of.
Do these nerve fibers act kind of like the distribution of them? Are they kind of like muscle fibers, like the muscle fiber types, like they're different per person?
Yeah,
Or are they
so-
pretty much the same?
Great question. That's slightly different than what we're looking at here. But when you get to, and we're not going to cover this in this class, when you get to biomechanics, we definitely cover this. In fact, we're about to cover this in biomechanics class. The type of motor neuron and the skeletal muscle fiber are linked. So there's like fast twitch versus slow twitch, which is kind of what you're getting at. This is slightly different than that. But I think if I'm answering your question correctly.
Like the distribution of them, is it
Yeah.
different per person or is it like pretty much the same for everyone?
Yeah, it is different per person. Not this, but what you're talking about as it relates to fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers, that is different per person. Most people are like 50-50, but your Usain Bolts are 70-30 and your marathoners are 30-70, something like that. So as it relates to this, that question I can't actually answer. I don't know. I would imagine it's pretty similar per person, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so we'll go over this in a couple of different ways, but so you have white matter and gray matter. What I really want to go over is kind of the posterior and anterior horns. Posterior and anterior horns, right? So posterior is in the back. If you think about, and dorsal I should say, think about the dorsal fin on a shark, easiest way to think about it. Okay, that's where the sensory information enters the spinal cord in the dorsal portion. Then we have our inner neurons, and then the kind of the efferent impulses travel out of the anterior portion, the ventral. So enters in the dorsal, then like the response integration, and then the kind of the motor program happens and gets sent out of the front. Let's see if I've got, yeah, there we go. You guys don't have this, but you do have this. It's the same deal. It's just probably hidden underneath. So if you were to go to this and hit the delete button, I bet that's hiding underneath. Is that right? So sorry, but you could just create a duplicate slide or just move the two pictures aside. So let's just follow this little pathway. In this color coding, sensory neurons, so afferent, right? So that's coming from the skin, the vision, the hearing, etc. That's going in the dorsal root of the spinal column in blue. You have an inner neuron. Remember that the inner neurons originate and terminate in the spinal cord. This is your stimulus identification. This is your response selection. And this is the motor program that gets sent out the ventral portion, and then back to the effectors, back to the skeletal muscle. Make sure you guys can see this, right? So that's a pretty good diagram to be able to follow. Pardon me. All right, we'll kind of continue along the same lines, but move on a little bit. So this is more like the pure, I guess you could say, anatomy and physiology of it. Here we get a little bit more into how the anatomy and phys changes with practice. We'll come back to this in the second half of the semester, but we've already hit upon it. As you practice, you get more myelin. So the velocity of the neural impulses is determined by how much myelination you have. More myelin, good. Less myelin, bad, basically, in a very simple sense. Okay, so saltatory conduction, as we've already said, or saltatory propagation. All right, it's just the nerve impulses traveling from node over NVA to node over NVA. Okay, the more myelin you have, the faster that those signals travel. So this is a super cool study. This is a pretty old study at this point. I believe it came out 15 years ago or so. A little bit of context. You guys may or may not be aware of this. As faculty members, like our job description, like literally in our contract, teaching is actually only 50% of it. It's like literally only half of what we get paid for. Some of it's like advising and committees, but a lot of the rest of that, what we get paid for is conducting research and publishing papers, right? Doing like peer-reviewed research, right? And the better research you do, the better journals you can publish in. So some journals are better than others. Some academic journals are really, really, really good and competitive, and others are okay, but maybe not as good. The three best academic journals in like biological sciences are Nature, Cell, and Science. If you get published in a one-word journal, you're doing something really good. So Nature is arguably the best journal there is. And it has some subsections. None of this is on the test, just a little bit of background. The journal Nature has some subsections, and one of it is Nature Neuroscience. So if you get published, if your neuroscience article gets published in Nature Neuroscience, that's a pretty darn good research study. So this came out, again, I think it was 15 years ago, but still, really relevant today. And what these researchers did in a nutshell is they looked at, as it says right here, really, really expert piano players and people who played the piano but weren't as practiced at it, weren't experts. And they looked at how many hours of practice they have logged, and you can't see it, but this says practice, and it says times 10 to the third, so that's thousands of hours of practice, right? Over their lifetime, not like in a day, right? So it's how many hours of practice they've logged, and then on the y-axis, that's on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, they looked at myelination. They did some fMRI and they looked at myelination. And although it's a little bit hard to see, correlations, pretty simple. More practice, more myelin. More practice, more myelin. So whether you're a piano player or not, this has huge implications for skill development, right? If you lift weights, what happens? Your muscles hypertrophy, and now you can generate more force. The cause and effect from a stimulus to a response to an effect is like straightforward, A to B to C. We all know that when it comes to weightlifting. But when it comes to like the neuroscience of skill development, like that wasn't really as well established. And I was like, okay, you do hours of focused practice, the myelination increases, and now we know with myelination increasing that the signal's going to transmit faster, and now you're better at the skill. Like that's huge from a research standpoint and just an understanding of what's going on as far as when people get better. So I know you guys are a few years away from this, but like if you're in your internship like 2 years down the road and your intern supervisor says, well, what happens when people practice? Why do they get better? And you say, oh, I don't know, just they learn how to do the skill. Well, like that's okay. But if you say, oh, increased myelination causes faster signal transmission, like your intern supervisor is going to be like, what? All right, and they say, hire this person. Okay, does that make sense? So it's the analogous situation to saying, well, when you lift weights, your muscles break down and compensate by hypertrophy, and now you can generate more strength. So this is a really, really cool study and an important study. So just to summarize, quality practice enhances the neural pathways, the conduction velocity, i.e. how fast the signals transmit. Yes, question?
Does the more practice, more myelination affect neurons and pathways that are specific to like playing the piano?
Yes,
Or, like,
great. No, great question. And I should have said that. Regionally specific effects. No, but I didn't clarify. Yeah, so it's going to be specific to whatever skill you're practicing. Practicing the piano isn't going to help the pathways that help you swing a golf club, right? Practicing the piano is going to affect the myelination of the pathways for practicing the piano, right? So yeah, great question. All right, so I'll keep you another 6 minutes. We're going to watch a video. Now this research study is old. This video is even older, but it's pretty cool. They're actually about the same time. So this video is, I don't even know, 16, 17 years old at this point. And it's on like one of those news shows like 2020 or something like that. And it's all about the same thing. It's about myelination and practice and kind of what happens. But it brings this to life. And this is fair game for the test, by the way, for the Unit 2 test. Yes.
Is this like exponential, or is there a spot where it can like go off?
Great question. Don't know the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, really, really good question. And you guys brought your A game. I can look that up for you, but off the top of my head, I don't know. With almost everything, there's an exponential trend. With like almost everything, I would expect that's the answer, but I don't know for sure. Sagan, or no, sorry, please. What's your name again? Cade. Behind you. Are you Cade?
No.
Jack.
No. Pretty close.
What's that?
Drop the letter. Brody.
Right. Thank you. All right, here we go. No.
2009.
There you go.
Good evening. From the power of positive
Oh no.
thinking to thousands of self-help books published each year, from making love to making money, it seems that all of us are looking for the secret to success. And tonight, you'll meet a scientist who believes that he's found the formula for maximizing your potential.
He's not a scientist,
He
he's a
calls it
writer, but that's
talent
okay.
Code, and says that if you follow the rules, you'll not only reprogram your brain, you'll develop your and your child's abilities beyond your wildest expectations. So, what are the secrets? And do they work? John Donvan now investigates.
Some kids just seem to have it, right? You listen to Rudy Eliza sing, she's only 14, and wow, where does this come from? And when you consider that this singing school where she's getting a little extra coaching, it's this faceless place at the end of a shopping mall beyond the edge of Dallas. And it seems pretty clear, this is innate talent, the key to success. Rudy was born with it. Maybe, but maybe not. Question, what does Jessica Simpson have in common with Demi Lovato? And what does Demi Lovato have in common with Ryan Cabrera? And Ryan Cabrera with Ashley Simpson. The answer is this faceless place at the edge of a shopping mall. They all went here.
Keep your tongue down.
They all got coaching from this same teacher, a former opera singer named Linda Septien. And consider, maybe inborn talent is not the key ingredient. Could it be a good teacher and good old-fashioned hard work?
That talent is practice. The talent is practice, and practice is talent.
Dan Coyle is a writer who set out to break what he calls the talent code, and in a book by that name, he tries to unravel the mystery of what makes a star.
It's a great book. I read it, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. It's a good beach read, but it's cool stuff.
Because I think right now, talent is sort of the last magical thing. It's magic, right? That's the story we're told in the media. It's the story we're told in the culture. Tiger Woods is magic. Michael Jordan is magic. Mozart is magic. But as we look closer and as we use modern tools to look at what's going on there, we're seeing a different kind of magic.
Coyle studied Linda Septien and her school and identifies it as one of several talent hotbeds that he's found, places that seem to produce the most talented singers, football quarterbacks, classical musicians. What was going on here? Well, let's start off with ingredient number 1, practice. Hours of practice.
Which makes perfect evolutionary sense, really. I mean, we are built to learn. We're a learning machine. When we stress the wires of our brain, the skill circuits of our brain in a certain way, those skill circuits get stronger. And in order to make a permanent memory, you need to repeat something.
All of which plays out beautifully in rat brains, which is what Dr. Doug Field studies full time. His work is really the scientific underpinning of Dan Coyle's talent code theory because of this white stuff he studies that the rats and we have in our brains, myelin. It's kind of an insulating material that wraps around the nerve pathways.
It's an area of the brain containing white matter.
Field discovered that this insulation actually grows each time an action is repeated.
White matter continues to develop and myelin continues to form, so it wraps that wire
gives it more insulation, and the signal moves much more fast and much more accurately.
Faster and more smoothly. So if you repeat the same action a lot of times, if you're, say, Tiger Woods, practicing the same golf stroke over and over, the myelin gets really thick and the brain cells start firing much more in sync, and that makes all the difference.
Imagine walking 2 miles per hour and having someone run by at 200 miles an hour. That's the difference we're talking about that myelin can make.
How important is over and over and over and over? And is it talent in the end, or is it the work?
That's a very good question. Talent plays a very important part in...
All right, cool. Hit the lights for me. I'll get you guys out of here in 1 minute. So, interesting video. Obviously, it talks about myelin, some of the same concepts. Also gets back to kind of the skills versus abilities discussion from Unit 1. I think the answer is always, well, it's a little bit of both, right? Michael Jordan, I mean, Tiger Woods, was Mozart. They had some pretty incredible underlying abilities. I don't think, it was just that Michael Jordan practiced a lot. But I think, again, the major point of this is kind of seeing what goes on with hours of dedicated, focused practice. All right, that's it. See you on Friday. Enjoy the nice day.